A couple of weeks out, we could see something was changing. February, you can start to see the numbers of the virus hitting, and there's a few, and then there's a lot more in New York. So we started to lay in a lot more inventory. We started to pull it in, not knowing if we would have an issue with the pipeline.
What you see on the shelf is what we have.
There was a concern that we might not be getting enough. Like, if everything's shut down, where are we going to get our food from? Because we are seeing all of our food drives disappearing and all of our fundraising events disappearing. And it really was like a day-by-day process. Everything seemed to be changing really quickly. As a director, I felt I had to just gather as much information as I could and really try to let everybody know it's going to be okay.
In March and in April, I saw more folks come through our food pantry that had never, ever been in a food pantry. Some of them were in tears. For the first time in their lifetime, they're not able to pay their house payment or their rent payment. And this is so stressful.
You would see them as never needing this assistance ever, having very decent paying, stable positions, married couples making $100,000 together. And now they're both out of jobs and they have nowhere else to turn.
Typically, we've been serving for the last year, 2 years or so. Our numbers have been about 3,000 families a month, and it's gone up as many as triple. May or June, we served up to 9,300 families.
In March of 2020, I saw the supermarket shelves empty and the endless lines of cars waiting to receive food, and my mind turned to the pressures that food pantries would face. I am a social worker and educator with decades of experience, including with pantries and homeless shelters. I knew this would be an unprecedented time for pantries, and it would go by so quickly and in such a rush that when it was over, it would be hard to remember all that had happened, the specific obstacles and achievements, the hardships and the heroics. I felt it was important for someone to bear witness to these organizations. The directors of 5 rural food pantries across Wisconsin agreed to speak with me throughout the pandemic. For nearly 2 years, during some of the busiest times in their histories, we talked frequently, and I regularly visited with pantries in Trevor in western Kenosha County, Wautoma in Waushara County, Oneida, home to the Oneida Nation, Sheboygan, a city which serves nearby rural areas, and Ashland in the far north of the state. Their story during the pandemic went beyond the emergency response, highlighting the ongoing conditions which had made these pantries essential long before COVID, and it demonstrated that effective public policy can reduce poverty and hunger. In addition to a rise in demand early in the pandemic, COVID mandates and health concerns meant these pantries had to do more with less, serving their communities with far fewer volunteers and continually having to change their processes.
When it came down that we were going to go to pre-box drive-through only, we did 200 families where we normally do 100 with a completely new process. And we made it through our first day without closing, so we never closed. The folks who remember that, there wasn't a tired bone left in our bodies.
The big change was that we were originally a choice pantry, so consumers would come in and select the food that they wanted. But we had to go to a complete prepackaged curbside pickup. So where we, as staff and volunteers, packed the boxes of food, deciding what the consumers wanted. That was the biggest change, is, you don't want to give something they won't eat.
Still got some chicken and stuff that's coming your way yet, so yeah, don't take off yet.
One of the most unique pantries I visited, and one that responded with exceptional ingenuity to the pandemic, was the Waushara County Food Pantry, located in a sparsely populated area near the middle of the state. The organization was originally meant to act simply as a pantry, small free grocery stores serving the immediate area. But during the pandemic, Executive Director Marty Lee and her team converted the building into a warehouse, storing food for distribution throughout Waushara County and acting as a hub for getting food to neighboring counties. Marty led us on a tour of the building, and we were lucky to have had her.
We call it a happy mess.
Because we'd likely have gotten lost without a guide.
Hey, Jenny. Oh, no. Yes, oh, yes. And here we tend to keep personal care items. When your household is struggling, then you need things like aspirin and soap and When the pandemic hit, I had more toilet paper than anybody in Washington County at that moment. It's not full if there's a happen next year.
I know pantry directors don't make much money, so I asked Marty what drives her, what keeps her
One of
going.
the things, as I look at what we have done in our county and in our country, I have to look back to my family. My grandmother, I called her Granny, but everybody else called her Mrs. Richardson. And she lived really close to the rails in Martinsville, Virginia. My grandmother sent me down the street with a wagon one day to take a ham and a couple of pies to someone who was having a bad moment. And she said to me, now I want you to take this down there and just say, we got more than we can use. And I said, but Granny, we have one ham. She looked at me and she said, child, did you not hear me? I said, yes, ma'am. And so I took it down there. But what I learned was we have plenty. We have plenty in this county. We have plenty in this country. People come to our pantry because we make them feel at home, because this is my home. It is all our homes. And if somebody came to your door and needed something to eat, you wouldn't be turning them away. And that's what allows me to do what I do.
Another pantry with remarkable resourcefulness is the Oneida Emergency Food Pantry in the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. There, manager Marlon Skinnendor showed us the innovative ways his pantry sources its food. Most pantries get their food from a combination of individual and corporate donations, as well as government assistance. Marlon's pantry does some of that too, but much of their food they get through partners in the Oneida Nation, who grow, raise, and process food in community buildings and land, then share it with the pantry. These include a hydroponic greenhouse operated out of the Oneida Nation's Veterans Building, which grows spinach, lettuce, kale, basil, and much more. Chunhikwa, a farm owned and operated by the Oneida Nation, provides the pantry with white corn, a staple not only of tribal food, but of its culture.
It's very nutritious, very enriching. That's how our ancestors survived the winter.
And the nation's cannery processes the white corn. The cannery operates out of the same building as the town's high school and supplies the school's cafeteria with white corn and other food. The pantry also receives meat from the Oneida Nation farm, where they raise cows and bison. Not all pantries have this ability. Many simply have to take what they can get. But Oneida's pantry puts a lot of thought into the food they share and what it means for the health and dignity of their clients. Oneida was recognized for its excellence by the United Nations State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report, which wrote that their intercultural and integrated approach to food within governance, policy investment, and community leadership has strengthened the food environment, improved public health, and reinforced intergenerational commitment to sustain their food systems. Some of the pantry's approach is informed by Marlon's own experiences.
Growing up, my mom always made sure that, our basic needs were taken care of, but sometimes wasn't always the case. Like, she always told us, you better make it over to them school lunches because you ain't getting lunch. Or moments where I would have, buttered toast for supper.
So sometimes, I'd be 8 years old, kind of fending for yourself, start relying on your older siblings, even to just get by throughout the day. I had my daughter, essentially passing along those same things.
Just enough money to pay rent. Well, what are we going to do about food? What are we going to do about that? You got to make decisions. Being through those situations, it brings passion for me to be able to help individuals. It makes my job easier to do because I know how it is to be in a position where you have to ask for help.
It's not uncommon for people working in pantries to have stories like Marlon's. You can hear these stories at the Sharing Center in rural western Kenosha County. The center and its executive director, Sharon Palmerville, try to treat the people who come through their doors holistically, knowing their needs are far from simple.
One thing I found over the years is most of the time when people come to a food pantry to get food, they need far more than they need just food. So one of the things we do heavily here is just to connect them with resources that are in the community, making sure that they're signed up for food share. Do they need to see a dentist? Do they need some clothes? Are they on the verge of homelessness? A lot of us who are here as either employees or volunteers were once in that position ourselves. And we realized what's out there available. And we also realized how important it was to becoming financially independent, if that's possible, or at least more stable financially.
Sharon knows from experience that the hurdles to finding help aren't just about access to resources and information, but are emotional as well.
And I'm always very particular when I talk about people who use food pantries. I want to be very mindful of their privacy, of their dignity, of what it takes to walk through a door, because I at one time qualified for a food pantry And I said, I will never go there. And so how do we get rid of that? Because I could have really benefited from this food as well.
The pandemic also made it more clear than ever how important collaboration is for organizations like these.
It's really brought everybody together in a way that's more meaningful. Even though we be small organizations and people in general, that we can make big differences.
I've worked for and helped form several nonprofits in my career, and in my experience, too often these organizations don't talk to each other.
Communication has always been very difficult for nonprofits writ large because, there's so many things on your plate to do. Links with perhaps nonprofits in another county, another region who are doing the same things as yourself, not knowing who's out there.
We don't know how many of us there are that do this, and it could even be just the next county over, and we don't realize that there's somebody there doing exactly the same thing we are.
But the pantries I talked to had begun talking to each other much more than the average nonprofits, allowing them to more easily share resources.
At any point, I can get 10 pallets of cookies. I need 2. Okay, but they're coming in my pipeline. So we start calling our partners and saying, can you use? You need this, I've got that. There's no money changes hands because it's all donated product.
If you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. Collaboration, hands down, will get more done in your community than programs with large dollar values.
Part of the reason these pantries are able to communicate so easily is the work of larger networking organizations like Feeding Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Federal Emergency Food Assistance Program. The pantries I talked with are also members of the Hunger Relief Federation, a coalition organized by the nonprofit Hunger Task Force, which connects pantries and other anti-hunger groups across the state.
Our federation was founded in 2016 to bring like-minded groups together who are on the front lines providing emergency food to families. We work together to share resources, share information, and organize around public policy that will help end hunger in Wisconsin one day.
In the early months of the pandemic, there was no rule book for how to operate a pantry safely and effectively. Collaboration became more important than ever, and the Hunger Relief Federation set up regular statewide phone calls to share information.
We realized we had to act together and act quickly.
I can sit here today and just speculate what were to happen without them, and it would have been much, much worse. I mean, we're so grateful for the Hunger Relief Federation. They've been providing us expertise on safety equipment and where to get the safety equipment, how to set up a mobile outdoor pantry.
In addition to help from other nonprofits, the aid these pantries received from their communities was also critical to their response.
Our donors have stepped up big time. I've had $5 checks. I've had cold cash somebody had in the freezer.
I was opening up the mail one day, and there was a check for $10,000, and I cried. I put my head down on my desk and I just cried.
The local support has come from every single direction you could possibly think of. Everybody was making sure that I was okay and that we could handle everything that was going to happen, which was one of the most amazing things I've actually been a part of.
Both collaboration and community support were crucial to the rollout of the Farmers to Families Food Box program, perhaps the most visible government effort to combat food insecurity during the pandemic.
Starting in the spring, USDA has allocated about $4 billion or so to purchase boxes of food, produce, dairy, and meat from vendors across the U.S. to distribute through charity. It issued requests for proposals. It made some very quick decisions, incredibly quick decisions on allocation of those resources.
The federal government purchased this food itself, but left it up to pantries to distribute it, often without any existing infrastructure to handle that quantity of food.
Hunger Relief Federation reached out to us initially saying we can bring down a semi-load of food for you to pass out to your community. At first I was a little scared by that because I was like, how are we going to get rid of that food that fast? They wanted to drop the food off and we had nowhere to store it.
I got a call from Feed America. They said, we have this truck, and by the way, it's going to come every week. Then I got a call from Hunger Task Force with the same question. Within 3 days, we had 5 semis coming in here, and I had no clue where it was all going to go. But I said yes, because I knew somehow or another all our volunteers and all our community would step up.
I had a lot of volunteers show up, people I didn't even talk to. We were able to move all that food in a matter of, I think, 3 hours, and I thought, wow, we can do this. And that was just the beginning of it, and it kept going. The most we had was about 454.
We're serving about 1,000 families a week through that drive-through. It's just been a real lifesaver for many, many families.
We're doing between 2,200 and 2,600 families a week in Washington County. That is an amazing feat. What we do are 9 mobile pantries a week. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're 40 miles apart, and they're 40 miles from the closest grocery store. 40 miles from the closest grocery store is a desert, even if you're sitting in a field of corn. In a pandemic, when money is tight and you don't feel safe going in a grocery store, we have been able to do with the food coming in, those mobile pantries. We've been able to serve folks having fresh food, milk, and vegetables coming into their homes.
The food was purchased in 5 phases over the course of 2020, and many food banks and pantries were happy with the quality of food in the first phases.
It's been just a blessing getting all this food. It's fresh, healthy food. It's produce, meats, cheese, just wonderful food that we don't always see it at the food bank level.
But over the course of the program, the food became less healthy and appetizing.
Each phase became farther and farther away from locally sourced distributors that had received the contract.
These boxes were packed with efficiency in mind, with filling the contract in the cheapest possible way. 1 week, their dairy in the box was just 5-pound tubs of sour cream. I have a family of 5, and it would take us quite some time to go through a 5-pound tub of sour cream, and I don't feel like that's the most nourishing dairy product. You know, it's more of a condiment.
We started seeing things like hot dogs enter into the system as opposed to something that is very versatile, healthy protein such as chicken that we had in all the previous phases.
In the face of skyrocketing demand, health concerns, staff shortages, and inconsistent food quality, these pantries succeed in getting food to their communities. This aspect of the story did not surprise me, but I didn't anticipate what happened next. That for many pantries, their hard work suddenly ground to a halt.
And then May, numbers just really plummeted. Maybe even in April as well. They just dropped so fast.
So how have things been in the pantry this week in the Sharing Center?
Slow. Slow. Crazy slow. We even opened up another day just thinking, well, maybe it's part because we, minimized our hours a bit.
Right.
Slow.
If you had told me a year ago today that we would see a food pantry with no visitors in one day, I wouldn't have believed it.
To begin to understand this surprising trend, we need to go back in time and look at what hunger and food insecurity was like far before the pandemic and what the government has been doing to combat food insecurity for more than half a century. Since the 1960s, we have been discovering hunger in America. In 1967, Senator Robert Kennedy was shocked by what he saw on a fact-finding mission to the Mississippi Delta.
I don't think that it's acceptable, as I've said before, with the gross national product that this country has, with the great amount of wealth that this country has, that we still have people who can't find jobs. We still have children who don't have enough to eat and don't have clothes to wear.
And shortly afterwards, the nation at large was shaken by the CBS documentary, Hunger in America.
Of the 30 million who are impoverished, 10 million Americans are hungry. Poverty, unpleasant as it is bearable. But man can't remain alive without food.
There was a consensus that something had to be done, but it was unclear what. Andy Fisher, a leader in the food justice movement, points to this as a key moment when the country decided to focus on combating hunger itself instead of its root cause in poverty.
Why do advocates talk about hunger rather than poverty? I think we can trace this back to the 1960s, the wake of the civil rights movement. Advocates decided that poverty was a broken brand, that basically poverty wasn't going to motivate the public to action. It was too much of a loaded word, it had too much baggage with it. That there was a general consensus in society that nobody deserves to be hungry, but you may deserve to be poor and not get the trappings of middle class life. So they went with hunger as a way to kind of motivate people and set forth on anti-hunger programs, which led to the growth of the SNAP program, led to WIC, led to kind of the suite of nutrition programs we now have within USDA.
As Fisher indicates, over the past decades, the government has relied on nutrition assistance to fight food insecurity. The largest of these federal programs is SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be called food stamps and which is now distributed through EBT cards. In Wisconsin, this program is called Food Share. SNAP provides important nutritional support for low-wage working families, low-income seniors, people with disabilities, and other households and individuals with low incomes. SNAP can be used to purchase groceries, with the exception of hot-prepared foods and non-food items like diapers, toilet paper, and soap. These benefits are often insufficient to supply low-income families with the food they need. On average, SNAP households redeem more than 3/4 of their benefits by the middle of the month, and a quarter of households with children say that by the last week of the month, they don't have enough to eat. At the same time that was implementing USDA nutrition assistance programs, the federal government also significantly scaled back cash welfare. In 1979, 82% of families with children in poverty received welfare or cash assistance. By 2019, that number had plummeted to only 23%. And the effects of these policies have been felt much more strongly by some people than others. On average, a white family is much less likely to experience food insecurity than a Black or Latino family. Indeed, during the worst economic recessions, white families do significantly better than Black or Latino families do during prosperous economic times. Across all of these groups, reduction in welfare and inadequate SNAP benefits, as well as stagnant wages, have made food pantries essential to many families' nutritional needs. Feeding America, the country's largest food bank organization, has nearly tripled the amount of food it gives out annually during the last 15 years to more than 6 billion pounds, and its website states that 1 in 7 people in the country utilize its network of food banks. Many pantries bear the name Emergency Food Pantry.
We call it the emergency food system, but it's a very long-term emergency that people are trying to meet.
Quite honestly, hasn't been acting as an emergency system in a very, very long time. We've been a kind of a structure or a feature, and we should be just an emergency food system to supplement when people have an emergency need.
So how has the system worked in the battle to fight hunger? Every year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture surveys families as to whether they have enough money to buy the food they need, or are skipping meals, or cutting down meal sizes for financial reasons. Despite programs like SNAP and massive increases in donated food, the survey found that rates of food insecurity in the country did not significantly improve in the 2 decades preceding the pandemic.
So if you look at that, you find that we're not making progress as a nation on reducing food insecurity. We're treading water. We're stagnating.
Many pantry directors hope for the day when they can go out of business.
And I'm also wondering if it isn't just the whole program itself, not just ours, but in general, that's the flaw of it. Maybe the whole thing is like, this shouldn't be here. Like if you were just able to eat, you wouldn't need this.
We love having a food pantry, but wouldn't it be nice if we were put out of business because they were able to actually purchase what they needed? That's not the reality.
And then suddenly, in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis, many of them actually saw what a country without food pantries could look like. The reason for this wholly unexpected event was that in the first months of COVID, the federal government's programs meant to handle the pandemic had the impact, largely by accident, of actually reducing poverty and food insecurity.
Late today, the president signing the biggest economic rescue package in history. The package sends $1,200 to adults earning up to $75,000 a year, $2,400 for joint returns. The rescue package adds $600 per week for up to 4 months.
The stimulus checks have hugely helped families to avoid having to sit in a parking lot waiting for emergency food that they may or may not get, may or may not be able to eat, may or may not feed their whole family.
A moratorium on evictions, a moratorium on utility disconnections, the additional funds that were provided for food share, SNAP benefits.
One that's gotten the most attention is the pandemic EBT program, where we basically said that since you're not getting free meals at school, we're going to instead give you the equivalent value on a cash card.
All those things together helped make consumers, especially low-income consumers, feel more financially secure than perhaps they've ever felt before. They weren't worried about not having enough food on the table.
Really allows them to go buy the food that they want.
Support their local economy, stimulate the economy, and shop for food at their local grocery store. I think that what we're seeing right now is that there are actually policies that can effectively prevent hunger. It's as simple as that.
Decreasing reliance on food pantries has many benefits, among them the fact that food pantries often cannot provide a well-balanced diet. The pantries I talk to are very conscientious about the nutrition of their food, but they still largely rely on donated food, and this can limit what they offer. These donations come largely from retailers who are unloading their product before the best use by date.
The industry relies on food banks to take care of their surplus food so they can continue producing surplus. Food banks kind of transform that waste into something golden. They get a tax deduction, they get earned media credit, they get all sorts of public benefits from appearing to be a hunger fighter rather than a hunger causer. And Walmart is a classic example of that. As they underpay their workers, they encourage them to go to food banks, they encourage them to rely on SNAP. They get a halo effect from donating that food.
Purchase participating items at Walmart and you can help secure a meal for someone through Feeding America food banks.
Instead of paying their workers a decent wage.
Pantries also depend on food drives, and many of these drives suggest individuals can end hunger through charity.
We've all been exposed to countless ad campaigns that announce really brightly, "End hunger today by donating a can of food or money." Or they'll ask you, "Do you want to end hunger? Well, just do this."
As part of our initiative supporting the Mid-South Food Bank, we wanted to see how many cans of Campbell soup we can fit in our X7.
And they use a lot of marketing gimmicks and in a way commodify people's pain and suffering.
Often, charity food donation emphasizes calories over nutrition, which itself reflects food access in the country at large.
What we've also seen over recent decades is that calories have gotten cheaper generally, and nutrients have gotten more expensive.
Unless you're the one that's hungry or you've experienced that hunger sometime in your life, there's almost always a misconception about who's hungry and what they're hungry for. And we know in our country as a whole that the lack of food is usually a lack of the access to healthy food. It's not usually a lack of access to food itself.
Sharon spoke to us about the importance of nutrition, both as a director of a food pantry and as a woman who's herself struggled to feed children with limited financial resources.
We would lean towards something familiar, something with enough flavor, something that was low in cost. A can of chicken noodle soup became a game just to see who could find more than 2 pieces of chicken in the can of soup. So essentially it was salty water and some carbohydrates. Looking back on that now, it is just such a low form of nutrition, and I wonder how that really does impact not only my children and myself, but here 30 years later, communities who are serving those same foods, and how does that impact good health?
Roger Thoreau's book, The First 1,000 Days, shows the impact of nutrient-rich food on a child from gestation through the first 2 years of life.
What the mom is consuming and eating in her diet and the nutritional intake that she has when she's pregnant with the child and then when she's breastfeeding, the child is solely dependent on what the mom is eating. And so the child already, the development of the child in the womb is already getting signals that, I may be born into a resource scarce world based on what the mom is eating. So any period of food scarcity, lack of food, micronutrient deficiencies then is taken on by the child. The conditions for good physical development, for the cognitive development, for the growth of the brain and all these neural functions and connections that are going on already at that time, that's all dependent then on what the mom is eating. We talk about, food insecurity, of feeding America. Nourishing America is perhaps, the better terminology.
Dr. Rebecca D'Souza has spent years talking to people who use pantries and studying how the effects of unhealthy food are not just physical, but emotional as well.
Not only were they worried about putting food on the table, but they were really anxious about the quality of food that they put on the table. There's a sense that, poor people, don't know what good food looks like. They do, and they were able to explain that in no uncertain terms. Good food is nutritious, good food is unprocessed food, good food is whole foods, fruits and vegetables. So receiving bad food, processed food, unsafe food is deeply stigmatizing. So if people get food that is on its way out, or a box of mac and cheese with worms in it, and yes, some clients did talk about that, or fruits and vegetables that are badly bruised, then it tells them that they're not valuable members of society. And they have to live with that idea, that they are not worthy of good food.
And stigma extends to many aspects of food pantry distribution. Many pantries require personal information, including income from clients. This is a very useful tool for collecting data for policy planning, but it places an emotional burden on the people asked to provide this information.
I mean, the whole setup is demeaning, based on the idea that people are trying to scam the system, so then they're constantly trying to justify their need for assistance. And this then takes a toll on their physical, social, and mental health and wellness.
I was concerned too when I was low income. Like, I don't want them to see my face. I don't want to be out in public and they look at me and they say hi to me and then somebody says, how do you know them? And I have to either tell them the truth, which would be embarrassing, or lie.
Part of the work in many pantries is to find new and better ways to work with their clients in order to break apart this stigma.
When they come to us, this is just a chance where they can take a breath and not feel like they have to make excuses or come up with some explanation as to why they're in a situation. We never want anyone to feel that it's a moral failure to experience financial difficulties or be hungry. We know anybody at any time could go through a difficult situation.
It's hard to get people to come to the food pantry for the first time. There shouldn't be no shame.
Thinking about stigma led Sharon to come up with a way to try to bypass it at the sharing center.
After I had started here and with the economy had taken that downturn, there were people who used to be our donors and used to be our volunteers who needed the food pantry and they're just like, I can't do it. My church volunteers there, my neighbor works there. There was some connection here somehow. And I said to them, okay, how about 8 o'clock on Friday night, I'll meet you here, because we close at noon on Fridays. And I said, nobody be here, just you and I. And they're like, absolutely. And I served, I cannot tell you how many countless families for how many years in that way, just to remove that piece of the stigma and the dignity, the loss of dignity of having to walk through a food pantry and everybody seeing your face, not being able to make ends meet.
One benefit of the Farmers to Families Food Box program was that the mobile distribution centers did not require any information from recipients or even that they showed their faces.
The mobiles have taken the stigma away a lot.
You know, they'll come to a drive-by where hopefully with a mask on, people won't recognize me. That's what I'm thinking. You know, people won't recognize me. Here, I got to come in, show my face, tell my name. And so I've been looking at how could we use any of that type of marketing or any of that type of distribution to get food to more people in our community who really could benefit from it, but are concerned about the stigma. Because the stigma is, it's big and it's right there and it doesn't get talked about enough.
Farmers to Families was just one of several pandemic-era programs which helped to reduce stigma. Increases in SNAP or food share meant that people could more easily get the food they needed simply by going to the grocery store. And under the Biden administration, there's been a permanent and historic increase in SNAP benefits.
The average SNAP benefits for food stamps are increasing by the largest amount in history now.
Last month, SNAP upped its benefits by more than 25%. Families now get an average of $36 more per person each month.
And in part because of the outreach efforts by pantries and advocacy organizations, the number of people in Wisconsin who are signed up for food share has increased significantly, with 24% more enrolled households in December 2021 as compared to February of 2020. Similarly, other pandemic-era policies further reduce the burden on struggling families and individuals. These include pandemic EBT, universal school lunch programs, which have been made permanent in several areas including Maine and California, and the child tax credit. All of these policies had a substantial effect on rates of hunger. In September and October of 2021, when the child tax credit and emergency SNAP allotments were in effect, only 5.2% of Wisconsin residents did not have enough food to eat. To put it another way, only 1 in 20 Wisconsinites was facing food hardship during this brief period. For me, this was as significant as anything else which happened while telling this story, and it was cause for real optimism. But as the pandemic wore on, many of these benefits were reduced or done away with entirely. Other benefits became inconsistent, which created a new kind of insecurity for recipients.
What I've noticed happening is that the government won't make the decision on whether they're going to continue giving people that increase in food share every month until somewhat the last minute. So you won't know months in advance. You may know a week in advance whether or not you're going to get food money next month, which is a disadvantage. And I feel it's really disrespectful to not let people know whether or not they're going to be eating the following month or not.
With the constant fluctuations in benefits, what remains is a baseline new normal of uncertainty. And amid this uncertainty, people are coming back to the pantries for help. Part of the new normal that isn't talked about much is the old normal, the people who needed pantries before the pandemic and continue to need them today.
You know, when we asked people if they had used pantries before the pandemic or if this was their first time, something like 40% or so were new to the system. 60% of them have been using them already. When we asked people what their challenges were to getting food, pandemic-related job loss were a really important issue for some people. But for other people, it was disabilities, it was the high cost of living, it was lack of health insurance, it was problems that predated the pandemic and problems that collectively aren't going to go away when the pandemic is done.
It's important to point out that most of the pantries we talk to serve predominantly white populations. Many pantries in Wisconsin serve other groups which did not benefit nearly as much from government assistance during the pandemic. Jennifer Estrada at Crusaders of Justicia works closely with undocumented workers in Wisconsin dairy farms and helps connect them with resources which are otherwise difficult to access.
They didn't get stimulus. A lot of them until pandemic EBT, because of their children being in school, weren't even allowed to have food share. You're talking about people that in some instances don't have a bank account. You're talking about families that don't have proof of income because they're getting paid with personal checks from some of these dairies. Working day in and day out to put food on our tables at these dairy farms, but yet we're struggling to put food on their own tables.
The uncertainty and compounding of new problems on top of the old takes a toll on those who work in food pantries.
So when fall came and we could see that the COVID numbers were increasing again, that anxiety, we could feel that anxiety starting to amp up again. If this might last for a while, how do we navigate this uncertainty for so long?
I have to tell you the truth. Every day I got up, I had to make a decision whether I was coming to work or not. I am responsible for people in my family, and if something happens to me, they go to a nursing home, and that can be frightening.
It was frustrating to see that there are tools that work to prevent hunger, and then to see these tools weakened, and for many people to have to go back to relying on charity.
If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we can make things easier to access. I think there's no reason why we wouldn't support our communities through public policy that supports children, supports workers, supports families.
The need for politicians and decision makers to take the appropriate decisions, be it on the SNAP or WIC or agriculture policies, or looking at issues of inequality and injustice in our society and in our economy. And so hopefully that whenever we get to whatever the new normal is, we don't bring hunger and food security with us. We don't bring these epic lines with us.
Food pantries cannot solve hunger because food by itself can never address the root causes.
The real reason for food insecurity, I believe, is because people are, in general, financially insecure.
There's not a direct correlation between the amount of food that we distribute through food banks and reducing food insecurity. What economists will tell you is that what really would drop food insecurity rates would be reduced unemployment and higher wages.
Food pantries are a symptom of a bigger problem. The problem that people don't have the money they need to be healthy and eat the food they need. You cannot throw food at the problem of hunger. You have to be an advocate for strong public policy that will actually prevent hunger.
Food can only treat the symptoms of the problems. However, these efforts are necessary and they mean a great deal to the people who are assisted. One thing that many people don't realize is often the goal of giving out food is not only to relieve hunger, but also to reduce financial insecurity.
We help the stress level of individuals. Once you're able to nourish your body, you can then think about other things. You can maybe use that money that you had before on the utility bill, which is less stress. So it's a built-on of bringing the stress level down in individuals so they can start to just feel a little more secure, but also focus on other things. You know, we shouldn't have to focus on food. It's a basic need.
You always hope that people can make it on their own, But if there's any other part of their life that is struggling because they are having to buy food, I wish they would come here and get that $250 worth of food every month and stretch their dollars in another way.
Trying to solve financial problems with food is an imperfect solution, but it is the biggest weapon these pantries have, and they use it very effectively. Many people who use pantries are working, but even if there is full employment and we have adequate public policies, some people would still need assistance, including those with disabling conditions and the aged poor. In the last 2 years, the pantries I talked to have become even better at what they do, providing more robust and flexible service to their communities. Sharon is taking elements from her unofficial late-night pantry and incorporating them permanently into the sharing center, making their services more private and convenient.
Implementing AAN, all online registration, setting appointments, filling out your shopping list, everything that's available for the day, kind of like Instacart. Just like any other grocery ordering system that most people use these days, we wanted to do the same thing for a food pantry. If it was just the stigma of having to come here, we wanted it a quick in and out to see if that would be easier.
The Oneida Nation has expanded its resources in key ways.
This makes you think about how much you really missed winter.
For the first time, they have secured their own walk-in freezer and refrigerator storage to increase the amount and variety of food they serve. In addition, Marlon, Sharon, Patrick, and the Waushara County Food Pantry each received a refrigerated truck in a televised ceremony through a state grant to the Hunger Task Force.
After COVID, if something were to happen, or maybe there was a tornado here, some type of emergency, we're going to be ready. We're going to have more than enough food, and nobody will have to question whether we'll be able to handle it because people will already know that we can.
Also extremely impressive was the expansion of capabilities in Waushara.
Even without volunteers, with fewer folks available, they have stepped up to become a hub for their whole region.
Through grit and resourcing from local foundations and businesses, Marty's mobile operation has grown from one overused 12-pallet truck to a small fleet, and she and her crew now have the use of a former potato warehouse. This allows them to massively increase the food and other goods they can store and ship out to their area. At the time we're recording this, it's been 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic. These pantries never stop serving their communities, knowing the dangers to their own health, the long-term, even endless challenges they faced, knowing that their efforts will not end hunger. They also know that their work is essential to the well-being of the people they serve. So they keep it up, day after day, trying to bring us food and all the other things we're hungry for.
It's about 20 degrees. 20 degrees, is that the deal? Okay.
We shed the snow pants. 20 degrees.
I got mine.
So we're going to do a full run today?